Today, prison, from the perspective of the guy who runs it. Because today, you and I meet the warden. Actually, better than that, the warden's boss. The warden of the wardens, the commissioner, who has himself served as warden previously and as sheriff. The Maine Model that we've been exploring for Prison Week, focusing on rehabilitation over punishment, owes a great deal to Randall Liberty, who we will meet momentarily. Aside from the prison stuff, he's just a fascinating guy. He started working in prison when his father was an inmate there. It is a interesting backstory that we get into. It's Prison Week, right here on The Political Orphanage. My guest today is Randy Liberty. He is the Commissioner of Corrections for the great state of Maine, after previously having worked as a warden and as a sheriff. Hello, Randy.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
Delighted to have you. I am a big fan of your prison. Words that I did not think I would be uttering on this or any program, but I had a great time in prison. Thank you for that.
Of course. Glad to give you a tour.
For anybody that skipped the preceding episodes of the program that don't know, what is the Maine Model? How are you different than other states or previous systems in the country?
The Maine Model really focuses on dignity and respect and treating people humanely, with a focus on a non-adversarial approach with the residents. We feel it's not our job to punish. The punishment is being separated from community and from family, and having that restriction. Really, our mission is to identify what brought people in our care, which is normally, in large part, mental health, substance use disorder, trauma background, poverty, neglect, learning disabilities. Those are all of our people. And so our job really is to identify those things with the resident and have a clear path on how we can address those things while they're doing time with us.
I think that's great. I am all on board with that. I think that should be the standard model. I'm curious as to how politically solvent that model is. And what I mean is, you've made it work in Maine, for which you deserve great credit. I'm from Oklahoma. I could be completely wrong about this, but my guess is that if I were to go talk to the Oklahoma State Legislature and go, we should incorporate the Maine Model, there would be a bunch of dudes that would go, you're a limp-wristed commie, and if we want to spend money on anything, it's going to be higher walls and thicker walls, and that's it, and we're not going to be nice to these people. Was that, are people in Maine just nice, or like was there a hurdle in getting these changes implemented?
Yeah, there are many hurdles. Some of it's legislative, some of it's gubernatorial, some of it's entrenched prison culture, both the staff and the residents. But what I find is, as I speak to my committee of oversight, the Criminal Justice Public Safety Committee at the Maine Legislature, what I find is of that committee, I have 4 police officers, I have some people that are middle of the road, and I have others that are prison abolitionists. And so as we have these discussions, I feel as though this model has something for everyone.
Okay.
And what I say to the people that are sort of punishment based, what I say to them is, if you truly care about making communities safer, strengthening families, and making Maine a better place to live, this is the model. This is how you reduce recidivism, that return to custody rate. And what that means to me is, if I put somebody through college and they earn their degree, and I just left the graduation here at the Maine Correctional Center. If we put them through a program and they earn at least an associate degree, they have a 0.05% likelihood of returning. And that sounds to me like a 99.5% success rate, where no one in the community is being harmed. They're being released, they get a job, they pay their taxes, they're no longer on the rolls, and the fiscal conservatives benefit from that, and they're law and order. So that would make sense to me. If you're on the left and you believe that we should have smaller prison systems, smaller jails, less people incarcerated, that works for you also, because we're able to shrink the populations and really only place people in a correctional setting that need to be there.
You mentioned that you went to a graduation the other day. One of the things that I was surprised by when I was at the Maine prison was how chummy the correctional officers were with the residents there. So like Chandler, who I'm going to talk to later in a different episode, he was part of my penitentiary entourage while I was there. And the relationship between him and the people he talked to was like a guy coming back to the old high school. It was like teachers talking to like, oh yeah, you've been out for 4 years. Like, what have you been up to? Is that your relationship? Are you like high school superintendent? How do you view yourself in regards to your inmates?
To give you a little bit of background, I've been in this industry for 43 years. I started in the Army as a military policeman. My first corrections was in a hard labor camp in 1983. So I've seen that extreme. I've also I served in a couple of county jails, and as a young man. In fact, my father was incarcerated in that jail while I served there, and I was in the same unit with him. I worked at the Kennebec County Jail for 26 years, where I was primarily a law enforcement officer. I did a lot of drug work. I did a lot of drug search warrants. I was a canine handler. I was a rescue diver. I went to hundreds and hundreds of crime scenes. I've been to homicide scenes and domestic violence and self-inflicted gunshot wounds. So I've been to those crime scenes. So no one can say that I'm naive to the harm that's done in the community. And so I tell you that because, when people say, they're victims, they're survivors to these crimes, I understand that. But what I also understand is that I believe in redemption. I believe that we all, at some one point or another, are on our knees asking for forgiveness, and I extend that same opportunity for the residents. And so when we provide a non-adversarial relationship, when we care about each other, when we care about the community, um, we have to recognize that the punishment model, the baton, the nightstick, the OC, capstun, the belly chains, the 23 hours a day in the cell, that only makes our residents worse and reharms them and makes them more aggressive and more violent when they're released. And so, how are we doing the community any service that way? So, I have found, and statistics are obvious. When I was the warden at the Maine State Prison in 2017, I had 87 assaults on staff. 87 times a staff member was assaulted. Last year at that same prison, as a result of the Maine Model, we had 7 assaults on staff. So not only does this work for the community and for the resident, but it also works for the staff. And so it makes it much easier for a staff member to work with somebody when each of you are respectful. It's a dignified approach. You truly care about each other and you care about the community. Everyone wins.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I'll add on the people making mistakes bit. I mean, granted, I was there for one day. There's a selective sample size. It was mostly me flinging myself at people that had dogs and asking them if I could pet their dog.
Right.
So I probably self-selected for extroverts. One would assume that the handlers that were with me were gravitating towards people that they knew would be fun to talk to. So there was some amount of selection bias going on. That being said, though, everybody I talked to seemed like a decent person that had screwed up really bad. I didn't.
Agreed.
There wasn't anybody where I looked into their eyes and I was like, "You're terrifying." I'm sure that there are those people, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there are some sociopaths that need to be permanently sequestered. But the folks I interacted with seemed to have active moral compasses and seemed to have a desire to re-enter the community. And if they were going to be there a really long time, they wanted to still have progress within their life in the 20, 30 years they were going to be at the penitentiary.
That's correct. And so, in the Maine Department of Corrections, I have 70 so people doing life. And those residents are some of my best residents. They've come to the conclusion that this is my life. I want to make it as rich and as beneficial as it can be. I want to have purpose, which that often means coaching and mentoring younger gentlemen or women in there, they're doing time with. Some of them, as you saw with the dog program, we have the America Vet dogs, and we also have mission dogs. And some individuals are raising service dogs for about 14 to 16 months for disabled veterans on the outside. That's meaningful to them. When the dogs are released, the veterans come in and they meet the handlers, and it's very satisfying. They receive a puppy very shortly thereafter, and they can continue that unconditional love and that partnership. So, for different people, it means different things. It can mean what's important to them, maybe faith. It could be giving back to the community. It could be raising organic gardening, raising organic produce, and giving 25% of that back into the community. It can be any number of things for these people to have opportunities. But you're right, and the graduation I attended was just 5 minutes ago, and they were graduating from the University of Maine at Augusta. That was their purpose. And I've traveled some of this journey with them. My mother dropped out of high school or junior high in 8th grade. And my father received his GED at Thomaston State Prison. And so the first time that I visited the Maine State Prison was 1971, where my father was incarcerated. And I have a picture in my office of me sitting on Santa Claus's lap at the prison as a 7-year-old. And 40 years later, I was the warden. So I have a different perspective. I have a perspective from a law enforcement officer that has been to hundreds and hundreds of crime scenes. I have the perspective of being a family member of those incarcerated. I have the perspective of I've had two of my nephews in my custody due to substance use disorder. So I try to have a broader perspective of really what brings people to our custody and what gets better outcomes. It feels good maybe to some people to punish, but when they release and they're your neighbor someday, they're going to be angry, violent, and not able to maintain a normal lifestyle in the community.
If I were making a pie chart for me of how I would want to allocate the rehabilitation to punishment model, I would probably be 80-20,
Hmm.
where I'd want overwhelmingly rehabilitation. I do
Hmm.
want some punishment. I don't know if that's a bad part of me, but
Hmm.
I'm confident that if my mother were assaulted, I would not be content to merely have rehabilitation. I would want there to be some punitive element. Again, it might be some lizard brain part of me. I'm not sure. What does your pie chart look like? Do you have other categories, or is it comparable? What do you think?
For me, it's probably, about the same 80-20, realizing outcomes. It's really about the outcomes. Um, Given the fact that I've been to many homicide scenes, sexual assault on children, I've been up close and personal to those very heinous, difficult crimes to get over. However, I believe that being incarcerated is the punishment, and it really is a significant punishment. I don't need to hit someone with a baton. I don't need to, not that I haven't, right? I've been around 43 years, and law enforcement and corrections has evolved. I don't need to stun gun them if it's not necessary. I don't need to have, a power dynamic over people. I don't need
Mm.
that. What I need to do is I need to provide public safety by incarcerating those folks that are dangerous to the public and doing everything I can to really modify their behavior and change them, allow them the opportunity to evolve as a person, explore and grow in their faith, in their education, in their vocation. And those are the best outcomes that I can provide as a public servant.
I'll try not to get emotional. I didn't realize how emotional that experience was for me. I was very much in like flim flam mode when I was there because I was like, I
Hmm.
want everybody to feel comfortable talking to me, so I'm gonna put on real Dick Van Dyke vibes as I wander
Hmm.
around the prison. But there were two people that I talked to that when I was describing them later, I teared up. Where one lady. Who's going to be there for a while? I think she's about to be moved to some kind of federal prison sentence for something. I don't know. Um, she seemed like she was doing really well. She seemed like she had a great deal of freedom, far more than I anticipated being in prison. Like she could Zoom or equivalent Zoom her family on a regular basis. When she started talking about her kids being raised by her parents and not being able to go to their high school graduation,
Hmm.
the burden on her parents, but just not being present in the lives of her children, who she clearly cared about. I was like, oh, like, yep, that's like this is clearly a punishment she's dealing with merely by having her freedom of mobility restricted. I don't know that she needs further punishment from this at this point. She's getting it just by being there and not being able to hang out with her kids.
Hmm. The guilt and the shame is a big component of being incarcerated. The guilt of destroying relationships around you. When we talk about restorative justice and the harm that's done, the harm is done to the community, it's done to relationships, it's done to family members, and then the burden, and then the shame of being arrested for a particular crime, being in the newspaper, being on the news, the trial, all of that, all the friends and family you've ever known. That's who you are, and the regret and shame are very difficult. And so we try, quite a bit of our effort is geared toward, destigmatizing incarceration, destigmatizing mental health and substance use disorder. That's not who you are. You have an addiction. You're not an addict.
Mm.
You may have a problem sexual behavior, but you're not a pervert. These are things that are a part of you, but it's not necessarily who you are in total. And can we redeem for that? And for me, how do you redeem? For me, there are many things that we can do here with substance use disorder programming and treatment, with education, with restorative practices, with reaching out to the people that you may have harmed in your community and giving back in a particular way. And so those are the things that I think that help people redeem and restore and, can be, virtually born again and become new people.
I want to get into some of the policy stuff. I'm going to kick myself if I don't ask this. Did you say that your dad was in prison while you were working at a prison? And if so, what on earth is your relationship like under those circumstances?
Yeah, so my father has a long rap sheet. He did a lot of burglaries, a lot of domestic violence, a lot of alcohol related crimes. He broke into a lot of places, stole a bunch of vehicles, hid criminal thinking. I can remember one Christmas where he had nothing for us on Christmas morning, and he looked across the street and saw that one of the neighbor girls had received a 6-seat toboggan, a fancy one. It was outside, and he walked over and grabbed it and brought it in the house and said, "Merry Christmas, kids." And when the policeman showed up and said, "Randy or Ronnie, they saw you take the toboggan. You have a warrant? Get the F out of my house." That mentality, right? And so when I was younger, he was at the Maine State Prison. He was in and out of county jail. He also, when I came off active duty from the Army, he was at the Somerset County Jail. And when I interviewed for the job, when I was going to college as a part-time job, the Sheriff Wright said, "We'd be glad to hire you. Do you have any questions?" And I said, "The only question I have is, my father's in at this point, and is that a problem?" He said, "Not if it's not a problem for you." And so back in the early 80s, there was no training. And so I went to the jail administrator. She gave me my keys. Next day I reported, and I was up in Charlie Pod. Not only was he in the same facility, but I was in the same unit with him, Charlie Pod. So I would, in the morning, "Good morning, Dad. Good morning, Randy." And in a odd circumstance, I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. I was a 21-year-old kid that didn't have any real corrections experience in the civilian world. And I'd say, "Dad, what do I do now?" And he'd say, "It's time to line up for count." I'd say, "Line up for count." It's just, and my father and I had he was very loving, nurturing, hug, kiss, tell you I love you. He just was not, he was criminally minded. He was a drinker, and he was a womanizer. And as a result, we suffered in poverty and neglect most of our lives. And we lived in a mobile home for the bulk of my childhood with 5 children, and 4 in one bedroom, and one was in a ripped out closet in the master bedroom. And we sold that mobile home for $1,000, and we're on free hot lunch, food stamps, surplus cheese, powdered milk. That's how we lived. And so that was the relationship with my father. He passed 20 years ago, and he was living I had an apartment house. He's lived in a subsidized apartment house, my place. And that was it. But he never showed any remorse, regret. It kind of flew over his head. He just kind of did what he wanted, and damn everybody else regardless.
Well, clearly, you've got a complex background in terms of looking at this situation. You can relate to the inmates in a way that most people cannot.
Sure.
And I'm. You also have a background as a sheriff, and so I'm curious. Like, when you were sheriff, were you coming in with this deeply sympathetic perspective? When you became a warden, did you kind of flip and go, "Oh, I regret cracking skulls as a sheriff"? Like, have there been any pivots you've done in terms of your interpretation?
So I never, whenever I arrested somebody or did an investigation, it was never personal for me. It was really, "You broke the law. I have probable cause to arrest you. You're under arrest." That was it. I can be, Mr. Rogers, or I can be Freddy Krueger, right? I can be however you want to play this thing, but you're under arrest, and you're going to jail tonight because you've done some harm to the community, whether it be dealing drugs or assaulting someone or whatever the case may be. And so when I arrived at the Maine State Prison, there were probably 30 people that I had put there. And so we have a different relationship. I knew them on the street. Someone might arrest them multiple times. So I would say that my view evolved over time, but I never had a cops and robbers, us against them mentality.
Hmm.
It was always, pretty, "You broke the law, you're under arrest, we're going to jail."
Are corrections officers generally like that? Like, my frame of reference is limited to Maine, and I went to the McAllister State Prison rodeo about 15 years ago. I overheard corrections officers talking, and they talked about inmates. They would gossip, but not in a mean way. They'd be
Hmm.
like, "Is Bill going to compete this year?" And they're like, "Nah, Bill got out. He's back in Guthrie now." But
Yeah.
it wasn't. I don't know. When you watch films, a lot of the time corrections officers have like a power complex that they want to do. Is that an inaccurate portrayal, or rather is it that you personally are trying to select corrections officers that are going to be more deferential?
So when I arrived at the Maine State Prison, there was a bit of a culture. And if the listeners Google Frontline Solitary Nation, that was a snapshot of 2015, 2014, where we had a segregation unit where people were flooding, smearing feces, cutting up, attempting suicide, extracting, we were extracting them, sometimes 20 a day. It was that culture. And what that does is often it breeds cynicism with the staff. And that culture can, if it's not cared for, if it's not guided, can become toxic. And some people, when I arrived at the prison, had been there for 25 years, had been assaulted multiple times, had been stabbed maybe. I mean, had feces and urine thrown in their face. You live that life long enough, it becomes, a very cynical sort of environment. And so it takes a deliberateness to say, we're going to stop and we're going to pivot. And you need to trust me as a leader that if we do this and we reduce we take a different approach, things will get better for you and for the facility overall, for the residents. At first, many of them were saying, if we reduce restrictive housing and you release people and it's difficult to get into segregation and there's a clear path for them to get out, there'll be blood on the mile. People will be assaulted. You're going to get officers hurt because that's all they knew. They knew power dynamic, they knew baton, they knew extraction, and that it was us against them. But over time, we've been able to take that risk and take a chance. And, some leadership were vulnerable, right? I was vulnerable. And, but if you're risk averse and you just warehouse people and lock them up, you get the same results you've always received. And so, as I mentioned to you, 87 assaults on staff, 7. Now I have the data in my hands over the years to say, no, this is not only good for the residents, but it's good for your wellness. If you're doing a 25-year bid along with these residents, and do you want to work in an environment where it's going to combat every day? Or do you want to work in an environment where you're truly helping people? Because when I interviewed you for the job, you said to me, you want to come here to help people. And here's your opportunity, not to make the situation worse.
You brought up the incredible reduction in violence against guards. What kind of metrics, how do you find success in your job? And what kind of metrics are you looking at?
So we look at things like, return to custody. Do they come back? We look at violence residents on staff, resident on resident, participation in medication for substance use disorder programming for addiction, participation in men's work, batterers program for domestic violence folks. All of that participation level, all the level of violence. We have a bunch of matrix that we look at, and what about things like self-inflicted injuries? Someone that's harming themselves, suicide attempts. All of those statistics have significantly reduced as a result of the work we're doing. If you want to do well, we can show you the way. And by far, that's what's happening. And so I have a population today of 1,933 people. The only people that I have in a segregated area are 8 people. Of all of those people that have done all of these, these felonies, I only have 7 or 8 or 9, depending on the day, that have done something serious that we need to do a timeout, get them out of the population, put them in a segregation unit, get them 3 or 4 hours out a day, find out what happened, work with them to have a plan, and get them back out. Sometimes, if an officer is assaulted, or if a resident assaults another resident, you have to take them out of the population for the safety of the rest of the population to secure them, program them, and then release them.
Yeah, first of all, I watched that documentary in preparation for visiting your facility, and it's chilling. It's really horrific.
It is.
The older model, and it seems to me that the older prison model, and perhaps the prevalent one, because I don't know how the rest of the country is, was kind of the mindset of like, look, we do have to have tools at our disposal. If somebody's being violent towards guards, we can't let that stand. We have to stop this. But they're already in prison. So, like, how can we punish them? Well, we just put them in super prison. We put them in solitary confinement, which is neurologically torture.
It is.
And it seems to me you guys have just really invented a lot of carrots. Like, I went to the various residential stages that you've got of intake pods and dorms. And I laughed when I went into the dorms. I was like, this reminds me of Northeastern Oklahoma State University. Like I went to Boise State at a very similar facility and was hanging out with guys there. And I was like, oh, okay. Like one of the guys I talked to had been there for 20 years. He was real chill, invited me into his room, gave me coffee. Like I get from his perspective, he's like, hey, like I am afforded a certain level of comfort, status, which seemed to be very important. He was really touched by the faith that you all put in him. That was
Mhm.
clearly something he felt a great sense of esteem from, and just being able to have those positive things. So like you're providing that framework of be a good member of our community, be productive, proactive, and all of that. And like we're gonna be a lot nicer to you. But if you start assaulting people, you get knocked back down to intake or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly how it goes, and catching people doing something right is what we're trying to do, and that works for us. That really does. And if you saw, typically there's one officer for 74 residents, depending on the population spikes, and that relationship building, one-on-one, them making rounds, them knowing intimately what the troubles are, think about this. If a resident gets a phone call from a girlfriend or a wife and it's a difficult conversation, if you know that, if you're aware of that, you can take care of them and assist them in some way, get them resources or whatever has to happen. Or if someone's particularly depressed, or they're bipolar or something, if you know your residents, rather than lock them up in a hole and then just warehouse them, the direct supervision model really works. It really does.
Um, I've I've heard that in California, the prison guard union is very powerful and regularly agitates for longer sentencing. The implication being that it's a kind of job security because the longer people are in there, the more jobs we get. Is that a phenomenon? Like I initially thought you're probably tackling the state legislature and the governor, but are there other groups that you're also having to interact with? And if so, what kind of pressure do they put on you?
The previous governor was a challenge. At one point when I was warden, he called me a liberal activist. And I was appointed and I was very job insecure. But we continued the work. The current governor is very supportive. She believes in data. She is a former prosecutor. However, she believes in the work we're doing. So that's not a hurdle ever. The legislature can be, again, some on the extreme right want, significant reductions in sentencing. On the left, they do. On the right, I find it's been pretty good actually. It's it's a challenge, but I think that we've been okay. The unions are not a concern for us. We really, it sounds like we care for the residents. We care for the staff. We care if they have an ability to have work-life balance. We care that they get the right training, everything they need, all the tools to do the job well. We try to recognize them, reward them for a job well done. We fight for their raises. We understand and praise them for the difficulties of nights, weekends, and holidays working in a correctional setting. So I feel as though we have a good thing going here, but it takes a lot of work. It's a lot of individual effort on the leadership team, working in collaboration with the unions, and but it works here in Maine.
When you came in, so you're coming in on the old model, which is the Solitary Nation documentary we discussed of
Correct.
the like throwing people in what do you call the hole. What are the first steps you do? Like you're now the commissioner and you've decided you're going to reform it. Like what are the initial processes you enact?
So for me, when I showed up as warden, I was appointed right by the governor, and so a lot of suspicion. Who's this new guy? So it was important for me to be able to say any veterans in the room, and they'd raise their hand. I'd say I'm a retired command sergeant major, fought in Fallujah, Bronze Star. I was legitimate with them. For the law enforcement folks in the room, that I could say I'm a certified police chief, FBI Academy graduate. I've been in law enforcement for 35 years. I was legitimate with them. For the corrections folks, I was able to say as warden, I was 30 plus years. Started my career in a hard labor camp. I've been at this a long, long time. And so it's important to have credibility when you're rolling, because the officers will do credibility assessments on everybody. How credible is this guy? Should we be listening to him? Should we push back? Right? All of that. And so with any leadership position, I feel, and I have a master's degree in leadership, right? And I've been I taught leadership at West Point. So roll in. The first thing I do is just get to know people, get to know the system. Don't make any major changes. Learn the system. Get to know everybody's sort of nuances. Talk to residents. Talk to everybody, and then slowly evolve the system. It's not about revolution. It's about evolution. Evolving slowly, doing incremental changes, so it's not too much too fast, because the residents and the staff all have to slowly adjust to the new norm. And it's really like turning an aircraft carrier. It's a slow process, and there's a lot of entrenchment. And there can be toxicity both on the staff, behalf of the staff and the residents. And so you do slow incremental changes. And you have to get in the facilities. You have to be seen. They have to see the commissioner involved. I have to know what's going on in each facility. I've got 8 facilities, and I'm in here as often as I can be to listen to the residents, listen to the staff, be aware, and work with our teams to grow provide the vision, and then keep being consistent, being fair and firm, letting everybody know we care about them, and to keep talking about our job is about outcomes. Our job is about outcomes, and allowing when I do something, when the wardens like have an idea and they want to sign off something that's going to be risky, let me sign off on it so I protect you. Let me jump in front of that bullet. If something comes, my job is to protect them so they have the freedom to, take risks and not be worried about being job insecure. And quite frankly, I think that one of the major concerns or major hurdles to major change in America in correctional settings is job insecurity for a warden and for a commissioner. The average lifespan of a commissioner in corrections in America is about 2.5 years.
Really?
And they're gone. Yeah.
It's not burnout. It's that they get fired.
Yeah, they have moved on to spend more time with their family.
Right. Okay.
And that's what typically happens. And I'm telling you, when I go to a CLA meeting, a Correctional Leaders Association meeting, there's 20% of the 55 or so new faces. And it's like, where'd Bill go? He decided to retire and pursue other opportunities. And that's what happens a lot. I feel like many governors say to the commissioners, keep it quiet, don't ask for any money. Right?
Yeah.
Keep it quiet.
I think that there's certain really difficult legislative traps that are very difficult to get around. So let's say that I'm in the state legislature in my home state of Oklahoma, and that I am aware that there's a kind of discrepancy going on in the current laws on the books. I don't know if this is true, by the way, but hypothetically, let's say if you get caught peeing in a playground, you are automatically a sex offender. Even if it's midnight in July and there are no children present, it's you were drunk coming home from a bar. This does happen. Like, there are people that get these charges, right? I, as a legislator, if I put my neck out and go, this really is not who we had in mind when we authored this law. There are decent people. They shouldn't have peed in a playground, but really this is something that we could have dealt with a ticket. But now when I run, I'm the guy that's defending the pedos, according to whoever I get primaried by. I've now got a big open lane to come in on soft on crime Heaton, who literally wants convicted sex offenders to have reduced sentences and things. So I would imagine that there's all sorts of politically fraught situations where doing the evidence-based reform just looks not very tough, and that makes it difficult politically.
I think you're right. I think it's popular to be tough on crime. It's popular to want large sentences to punish. The problem is that feels good, but it defies reality. And I have a $237 million budget, and we would love to invest that in education, housing, vocational programming for people on the outside, rather than provide in carceral setting for them. And so you're absolutely right. Politically, it's damaging. It's the same in appropriations. When we, it's going to be tough fiscal times. We've had significant reductions in some of the federal funding as a result of some trans issues. And my Governor Mills, stood up to Donald Trump and said that we'll see you in court and we'll follow the law. Very shortly thereafter, we started seeing reductions in a lot of the funding, punitively, I think. And the fact of the matter is, in corrections, we're following the law. And if you believe in the rule of law, and we're a nation of laws, that shouldn't matter where the political pendulum swings. We should be just following the law. And that's what we've been doing. And so one of the things that's been challenging recently for me is we've allowed, right now I have more than 800 of our residents have access to the internet. And so they're full on internet access. I have 160 that are in college. I have 5 that are graduate students. I have 3 PhD candidates, and they're focused and they're in school and they're doing very, very well. The question becomes, once I graduate from college and I'm doing a 20-year bid, what can I do now? And so what we've done is we've created an opportunity for them to work remotely. And so they're literally sitting in their cell with a laptop with a job on the outside. And my first go of that was I had Colby College reach out to me and say to me, would you allow a resident to teach as an adjunct? And that was sticking my neck out, and I was
fascinating. Wait, they reached out? Was just anyone, or like they knew someone specifically?
they
Where
knew
they're like,
somebody.
Billy's a really good instructor. Like, yeah.
They knew someone. And so the unique piece of this was he was my first case as the elected sheriff. It was a heinous crime. He received a 40-year bid. I hadn't seen him in 15 years. When I went down to the prison, there he was. And he'd been doing all the right things. He was a hospice worker. At the time, he was working on his undergrad. He was raising service dogs for veterans. He was a peer mentor. Everything we could possibly, discipline-free, anything you could ask for this 18-year-old that committed the crime as an 18-year-old with underdeveloped brain. And now here he is in his 40s. And so I met with my counsel, my wife, and said, we're going to take a chance here. And she agreed, and we did. And so I authorized that. And I think he's probably done 7 or 8 semesters now. And I even allowed his students from Colby to come to the prison. He toured them around the prison. And so
is he still in?
Still in. Will be for another 15 probably.
Wow.
And so so that gentleman, we did that first with. And then on that one, a year and a half after he'd been doing that, the governor called me and said on a Saturday night, when the governor calls on a Saturday night, no, not a social call.
Yeah.
So hey, Randy, please tell me that this gentleman is not teaching at Colby, and this is the job insecurity we're talking about. And I said, he is. And I said, if I could explain, last year he made $27,000 teaching. And he spent $800 paying for breaks for his mother so she could go to work, get her car inspected. He spent a couple $1,000s for tuition for his nephew to go to college. He spent $1,000 on the resident indigent fund for residents who didn't have any money. He spent $1,000 at his local church tithing in the community. He spent $1,000 in harm reduction bags for the residents or homeless folks in the community. And then she said, great, good job. And there it was. And he wasn't, someone had led her to believe he was traveling to Colby, but no, it was distance learning. I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Maine at Augusta. And in my class, it's the same thing. I have 6 or 7 students in my lab in the studio. I'll have 8 or 10 on Zoom. I'll have 3 or 4 zooming in from the prison. All a very diverse group. They're the best students I have, and they provide such a diverse perspective from the free Mainers. And I teach restorative justice and correctional mental health, and they're credible messengers. They can say what's happening. They can talk about their journey. They can discuss all of that. So further, since that's happened, we've allowed 45 individuals to have remote jobs from the prison system working in the community. I have paralegals that have released and now work for the law firms. I have people that are applying for jobs online all the time. And when they reveal, sometimes they're turned away, but many times they're not. I have one gentleman I just spoke to at the Baltic Correctional Facility, and he is working for Unlocked Labs, and he made $70,000 last year. I have another gentleman that made $110,000.
He's beating me the first 2 years I podcasted.
I know. So, but you think about this, and that requires a conversation with the media, with podcasts, with legislature and the governor to say, listen, when I investigated drug crimes, because people are addicted and they had to feed their habit, sometimes they would have done 30 burglaries, and they owe $100,000 restitution to the victims. If they're the lowest paying job I have at the department is a wheelchair pusher. That person makes $50 a month. If that 80-year-old widow is owed $20,000, she gets a $5 check in the mail once a month from that resident. If the individual's making $70,000, that 80-year-old widow gets a $1,500 check, and she's made whole. So this goes back to what's best for the community, what's best for the victims, what's best for the survivors of crime. He's able to pay his child support. He's able to pay the mortgage on his home. He's able to pay tuition for his children. And now the taxpayer isn't paying that. They literally pay room and board to the Department of Corrections while they're serving in our custody, relieving the tax burden on the taxpayer. How is that not a win for everyone in the community, for the tax base, for them, for their families? Everyone wins. If you can get over where's the punishment in this?
Hey gang, this is the last episode of Prison Week here on the Political Orphanage. Thank you everyone who has shared the show. If you enjoyed this week and the folks we met, do me a favor, text or email an episode of the program to somebody that you know. The Political Orphanage is a home for people who want to understand problems more than fight partisans in red team versus blue team slap fights, and your intrepid host does things like read Supreme Court decisions, and go to prison for you. I'd sure appreciate it if you introduce like-minded people to our community. Send me a screenshot of your message to andrew@mightyheaton.com and include the word screenshot in the subject line. And next week, I will go through and I'll pick one to send a special thank you note to. Also, I just listened to this interview for the first time since I'd recorded it, and I had forgotten that I'd pledged to fly some state legislator out to Maine to take a look. But I do stand by that. If you're in the state legislature, reach out. First come, first serve. Go see Maine for yourself. I think this is important. If you would like to support me in that endeavor, or in general, it would be great if you became a patron of the show. Go to patreon.com/Andrew Heaton or on Substack at thepoliticalorphanage.com. You'll not only make the show possible, you'll get bonus episodes, including 2 more episodes this week of Heaton Goes to Prison. Go to patreon.com/Andrew Heaton and thepoliticalorphanage.com on Substack. Thanks! When I talk about this with people, if I'm talking to my Democrat friends, it's a very easy sell because I'm just like, you know what they do in Scandinavia? And they're like, we don't even need to know. We'll do it. Scandinavia's great. So like that one's an easy one, right? When I'm talking to more conservative people, like I take your approach with math, where I'm like, look, like my top priorities are keeping the community safe and also using the least amount of money from taxpayers. That's what I want. And it's cheaper to rehabilitate people than it is to screw them up and get them emotionally traumatized and then release them into the community where they reoffend. And I hadn't even thought about like the restitution angle of this. If people are working remote jobs that they as part of their prison sentence, they might have an outstanding debt to whoever they aggrieved, and that job allows them to pay them back. Great.
It does.
Great.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So you say you've got like 24,000 people or so that are a part of this prison system, something like that. You've got a very large
1930.
1930.
Yep.
You've got a very large sample size, and you've been working in this a long time. Can you kind of give me an idea of a mental pie chart of what brings people there, like the proximate cause of the decision they made? Is it like disproportionately drugs and alcohol? Is it disproportionately untreated mental health? Is it poverty/education? Is it just like broken brain sociopaths? Like what does the landscape look like?
It is substance use disorder. That's a major part of the pie. Mental health, and most often co-occurring mental health issues with substance use disorder. So it's that co-occurring disorder is frequent. I would say trauma background is next. As a child, the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, that's a significant factor. It's very predictive. When we sit down and say, were your parents incarcerated? Was there addiction in your home? Was there domestic violence? Was there sexual assault? All of these things are very predictive that you'll be incarcerated at some point in your life. And we know that there are also some ways to mitigate that. If you have someone in your life, an adult that cares about you, right? It could be a coach, could be a teacher, could be right. If when I went to many homes, very predictive for me as a law enforcement officer to see a mobile home, no screens on the windows, the door open, trash outside, an extension cord from one trailer to the next because there's no power, the power shut off. Very predictive that the child would have a very difficult upbringing and challenging adulthood. With my brothers and I, the things that I think that as I look back what saved us was adult male role modeling through our coaches with football and track, and then adult male, and that's how we learned how to really talk to a woman, how a person speaks without vulgarities, how a person manages their lives. And then we all joined the Army. And that gave us adult male role modeling as a drill sergeant and as a senior NCO. Very clear. I don't care who your father is. I don't care if you live in a $1,000 mobile home. If you work hard, if you have a strong work ethic, if you have good integrity, you're value centered, you're visionary, you're a leader, you're a team player, You can, and we all did. I thrived in that environment. You know, I was a sergeant, 19 months in the Army, I was a sergeant. And I also endured very difficult childhood. So if I had a hot shower and 3 good meals, life was good for me, right? And so I was a drill sergeant. I taught at West Point. I led an 800-man infantry battalion in Fallujah. It worked for me. And that also gave me the GI Bill. And so we all went to college, and that further broadened us and grew us. And so they need that. So I would say that it's substance use disorder, mental health, co-occurring disorder, trauma background. The psychopath thing is a tiny rarity, very, very rare.
So this is not like because while I was there, I had a great time, and then when I left, somebody's like, "Do you have any idea how many murderers you talked to?" And I was like, "I don't know." And they were like, "At least 3 that we know of." And I was like, "Really? I didn't realize that." So it's not a situation where we've got like 10% of the population has within prison has a malformed brain and they're irredeemably dangerous. This is a fractional rarity of the prison population of somebody who's truly psychotic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so on my end, as a normie on the outside, it's very easy for me to be sympathetic to and hopeful in people that commit nonviolent crimes. So you mentioned like somebody that burglarizes 30 places to get their drug fixed. It's like, like that, it's hard to get that monkey off your back. Like you've done your time, you've gone through some sort of rehabilitation program. Welcome back to the community. For people that like commit serial rapes or murder multiple people, how reformable are they in general? How likely is it they're going to go back into the community in terms of sentencing, and how worried are you when they go back?
For people that commit, they have problem sexual behavior, the return to custody rate is very, very low. They are supervised by probation. Nationally, there's a lot of polygraph tests that we give to get a baseline of reality, because obviously it's a lot of stigma and a lot of shame associated with that. And so we do polygraphs, a baseline, and we do follow-on polygraphs. And but it is very challenging because in most communities, like in the state of Maine, you can't reside within 1,000 feet of a school. Some communities go further. You can't reside here. A playground. You can't reside here. You can't reside. And so what happens is there's no place for them for housing, or they're pushed all in a concentrated location, or they're pushed out of the community, way out in the country where there aren't services, and there may be transportation issues and all of that. But in spite of that, the return to custody rate for those folks is very, very low. People that commit, multiple homicides, they're going to get a 40-year bid, 50-year bid. They're going to, very few of them release young men. They just don't, right? They're doing heavy time. We have a hospice program at the Maine State Prison, and I have been involved in probably 14 individuals when I was warden and a bit later that they die there. And when they die there, sometimes, depending on the circumstance and the offense that was committed, they're given an opportunity to pass in the community. However, depending on the crime, they burn bridges with family members and friends, depending on the crime. And then also, if they've lived 40 years with the community within the walls, that's their community now. And the people that perform the hospice program care and love these guys. They really deeply care for them. And so rather than having a hospice crew come in that is foreign to you, don't know them, they're very nice and nurturing, but they don't know you. These hospice workers really, truly love the people that are passing. And so the recidivism rate of them, or the likelihood of them releasing, is very small. The individual that did the crime I talked about, it was a machete case. That person wasn't killed, but they got a 40-year sentence. They'll be releasing plus 50. So like you and I'm not the person I was when I was 18. My brain's fully developed. I've educated myself. I've been exposed, learned a much more.
I gotta say, I like that I have declining testosterone. Like, it makes my life much easier. This is like impulsivity, a liberation for my 20s.
Yes, for sure. And so, yeah, that's kind of how that goes. They get long sentences and they stay until they're old men.
One of my friends is a criminal justice expert, Jennifer Doliak, and I interviewed her a couple of years ago about just like crime statistics, what we can infer. And the low-hanging fruit that she indicated to me was that it's really anybody over 50 is very unlikely to do a violent crime. That it does seem to be strongly correlated with youth and I think testosterone.
It is.
Yeah, the 27-year-old guy, he might go bust some heads, but the 45-year-old guy, even if he was really violent at 27, is probably calmed down. That is your experience?
That is my experience. And quite frankly, in a correctional setting, the most challenging to manage are the 18, 19, 20-year-olds. They think they need to play prison. The 50-year-old will say, hey, listen, you're doing an 18-month bid here. You're not going to cause havoc and destroy this community. I've got another 20 to do. And so you're not going, listen to me, kid. Trust me, you don't want to do this. And that's what happens. And that mentoring from those long timers is a big part of the success of a facility. Those long timers that have continuity, that are coaching, mentoring, and finding meaning by doing that mentoring and coaching and peer mentorship, that causes stability. In fact, we talk about all the time that at the Maine State Prison, we have people doing very heavy time. The people at MCC, there aren't as many long timers here, and that's a disadvantage here. When you come to the Maine State Prison, I hope you will, you'll see that. We have an earned living unit where we have 32 individuals that was formerly what you saw in Solitary Nation, that segregation unit. That's now a virtually unsupervised unit. I was there yesterday. You go in there, it's self-governed. They have town hall meetings. They manage it themselves. They have an 1.5 acre organic garden. That used to be no man's land. Prior to this before I took over commissioner, if somebody was out there, you had the authority to use deadly force. And so now the gates open, they're gardening, 1,000 strawberry plants, 1,200 raspberry plants. Right now they're eating asparagus out of the, and they're cooking their own meals. These are people doing heavy sentences. Yeah. The only difference is it's not the men, it's our approach. It's the officers. They're the same men that were there 15 years ago, but our approach is different.
So, okay, I'm 1,000% with you on this. I think this is great. I'm all in favor of the Maine model and the Scandinavian model. Some of the pushback that I've received when I'm promoting this kind of stuff conversationally is I had somebody that went, Heaton, in theory, if somebody was a serial murderer, serial rapist, no remorse, and we could give them a pill that would rewire their brain to where they can't commit rape or murder, would you just release them into the community? The question basically being like, if you could rehabilitate somebody, would you eliminate the punishment? What would you think about that kind of scenario? Like, do you still want there to be some amount of wrist slapping, or if you could just hit a button and rewire their brain, they can't commit a violent crime, would you do it?
I think that someone that does serial rapists, serial homicides, murders, they need to be in a correctional setting. They need to be separated from society. If there's any risk of them murdering someone else again, or performing some problem sexual behavior on somebody, they need to be in a correctional setting. We can treat them with dignity and respect, and they can have opportunities to live, but they may have forfeited the ability to be free in our communities. Public safety is the most important thing here.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Finishing up on rehabilitation, it seems to me the deck is completely stacked against people coming out of prison. Like most states, you're going to have to mark down that you're a felon in a job application. Mm-hmm. I, as your hirer, like cover my ass principle, I, as the guy that's hiring you, I've now lost my job in the state legislature. I'm now a hiring manager at Applebee's or something like that. If anything goes wrong and I willfully knew that I was hiring a felon, I'm going to get in trouble. So there's a real incentive to not hire anybody with a criminal background. You mentioned some of the issues for people that have sexual crimes in their past, but I think a lot of places require you to mention if you're a felon in any capacity to get housing. So what kind of proactive things are you doing for people as they reintegrate into the community?
For me, it's all about having certifiable, redeeming sort of actions. So a bachelor's degree, right? That's redeeming, right? If somebody commits a felony and they join the military, that's redeeming. What can you do to redeem? And so if you're anything, you get certified. So if let's say you're into automotive stuff. If I can get you into an automotive program where you earn 10 ASC national certifications, that's how you start to stack the deck in the other direction, right? Any certification, any training, any programming that doesn't have the stink of DOC on it, right? You can say these are externally certified university, like let's say if you're a gardener, I can put you through a master gardener course through the University of Maine. That's a certificate through the University of Maine. If any of the programs, that's what we try to do. External sort of redeeming acts that you can show that employer, that was me then, this is me now. Look what I've done to redeem myself. Give me a chance. And luckily, in the job market now, it's pretty good, and there are opportunities. I am a felon, but I can weld. I'm a certified welder in 3 different categories. Let me show you what I can do. And they tear up a weld. Yes, you can. And we try to steer them toward industries that are forgiving, like welding. You can hang up a shingle in your garage and weld, right? You can, here in Maine, we have Bath Iron Works, and they're looking for welders because we build warships here. That's a job that they'd be more forgiving. We also do commercial driver's licenses. Those are things where municipalities, cities, they need plow truck drivers here in Maine to plow snow.
Mm-hmm.
They need fuel delivery for heating fuel in the winter. They need ice trucks in the summer. So trying to find those jobs that are more accommodating to someone with a felony, that's what we try to do, steering in those directions.
You mentioned a minute ago the Resident Indigent Fund. What is
Yes.
that? Is that something I should donate to?
So what this is we have a fund. I have about $500,000 now. That this fund is only for the residents' well-being. So the way that we fund that is a couple different ways. We in the nation, phone equipment, there's usually a charge of 15, 16 cents a minute, which is very heavy. We've always charged 9 cents a minute. 3 cents of that goes toward the resident benefit fund. 6 goes to the vendor that provides that equipment and the service. The FCC last year eliminated that ability, and everyone in the nation only went to 6 cents. So we lost a revenue source there. So the other thing we do is we sell a commissary, which is cookies, candy, soda. The residents that are working can buy those items, and there's a 20% skim on that goes to the resident benefit fund. So we do those kinds of things to provide an opportunity for them to have things that the legislature wouldn't approve. If I'm standing in line, they're going to approve elder housing and free hot lunch for the children 30 people ahead of me, and there's no money left. So if and we sit down with the residents, we have a resident council, advisory council. What do you need? And they say, well, we'd like a new $50,000 weight room. That sounds reasonable. I can't go to appropriations and say, I know you wanted to, but, so they were able to do that.
So it's kind of I'm not saying this pejoratively. It's kind of like a slush fund that's under your discretion for stuff that would run afoul of the build higher walls crowd within the state legislature.
That is not tax base. So if you have someone that's more likely to spend money on corrections, that's great. However, when the pendulum swings and they're cutting, I can't have that be a line in my budget because they'll sweep that. They'll be the first thing to sweep. So this gives us the freedom to provide those things that they may not have. It also is I'm able to provide hundreds of jobs out of that for the residents, so they have jobs. And so it's a cycling sort of a fund that we're building on, and we found some ways to sustain that now, and it's worked out well. And they have a say in what we spend that money on.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, because if you were going to go to the state legislature and you're like, I talked to the fellas, they're really into Battlestar Galactica, and they would really love for us to get Battlestar Galactica on Blu-ray, they're going to be like, go away. Or if you're like, I don't know, I want, like, they've been really getting into holistic medicine. They want some textbooks. Like, they're not going to get you that, but you have some discretion there. If you're like, no, this is what they want.
I can buy guitars, drums. I can buy all kinds of things that we wouldn't have access to.
So, okay, while I was there, I'm kicking myself because I didn't ask anybody questions about this. Okay, let's say I get arrested in Maine. And by the way, if I get arrested, I hope to God it's in Maine. if I'm not saying I'm going to commit a crime.
I'll save a bed for you.
But if I do commit a crime, it's going to be in Maine if I can pick where I do it. So let's say that I go to Maine. I happen to be straight, but let's say I was gay. Am I allowed to get a boyfriend? Like if I'm gay and I'm in prison and like Todd and I hit it off, turns out he's gay too. Like, are we allowed to have a relationship? If so, how does that work? Can we be like roommates together if we're not afraid of commitment?
That's federally guided. The Prison Rape Elimination Act doesn't allow for any legitimate consensual sex.
Okay.
It's not authorized. You can imagine if it was.
Between inmates and anybody else?
No one. Yeah.
Okay.
Inmate on inmate, inmate on staff, know that. And so what happens, practically is it occurs. It occurs. And they receive a briefing when they arrive. They receive a survey when they arrive. There are 1-800 numbers all over all the pods. If somebody does something sexually inappropriate to you, there's a hotline. and it's very managed. In fact, we have prison rape elimination inspectors come in annually to talk to the residents, talk to staff. Is anything going on? Are you aware of your rights? All of that. But to say there's no sex is wrong, right? So let's say you have an officer has to make a round every hour. The residents know that, and it's nighttime, and he makes a round. He knows he won't be around for another hour or so. So some of that happens, and some people say, "I'm not homosexual. However, this is all I have access to." Right? Some have legitimate romantic relationships, but it's not endorsed or allowed. But I would say it occurs.
And technically, I could have a romantic relationship, it just couldn't be sexual?
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I think I know the answer to this question. It does not sound like you have, what do you call them? Conjugal visits. That does not
No.
sound like that's built. But it doesn't sound like anybody has conjugal visits then.
That's never been our history. We've never had that. Yeah.
Okay. What other kind of stuff do we get wrong in media? Like I kept joking while I was there that like 90% of what I know about prison is Shawshank Redemption by Stephen King. I don't know how accurate any of that is. So
well, Stephen King's inspiration for Shawshank was the Maine State Prison, the old prison before the new one was built, and that seems pretty accurate to that era. But I think that it depends, right? The state, the penitentiary, the prison. There's a lot going on. I mean, my colleague, my deputy, Ryan Thornell, went to Arizona, and he's the director there now. And Arizona's reality is not Maine's, and a lot of violent gangs. 35,000 residents there, a conservative legislature. It's a different game. Every system's different, And right now, I've had really great alignment with the governor and the legislature and my team. I've got a very strong corrections officers and sergeants, and I have a really great team. And so not everyone has it as well as I do. Some circumstances are difficult. If I was to step into another prison system, let's say in Illinois or Arizona or New Mexico, it might be very, very different and so large, so difficult to manage that the media may get it right sometimes. One of the things that, like Unlocked, some of those shows you see where they just unlock the cells and they leave, the staff leaves and they kind of Lord of the Flies. That sort of stuff is so, it's so low end corrections. The key should be unlocking and then providing resources and guidance and mentorship and all of that to get better outcomes. But yeah, some of the stuff's sensationalized, obviously, and doesn't happen the way that they see it. But again, if they were to roam around Maine Department of Corrections, there's not a lot of drama going on. So it'd be for very boring TV, other than maybe a documentary where you could see maybe how you can do it right.
If I were going to try to compare, as a journalist, if I were to try to compare and contrast what you're doing to the older model or the punishment-based model, is there a particular state or penitentiary that would be a good counterbalance to what I've seen in Maine?
I would not say that to my colleague in any other states.
I don't want to get you in trouble. I'm just
no.
When Joe Arpaio was around, I think he was the antithesis of you, but I think he's now retired.
So I was sheriff. I was sheriff when Joe Arpaio was the sheriff in Maricopa County, and many people come up to me, have in the past, and we like what Joe was doing. The problem is that stigmatizing, putting people in pink uniforms, feeding them moldy bologna, putting them in a GP medium tent, army tent when it's 110 degrees out, torturous, right?
Yeah.
And funny until it's your son or daughter.
Yeah.
Right. And what's the return to custody rate? And the other thing to think about is for those that are tough on crime, he doing the things that he did were found to be inhumane, and the lawsuits and the money he spent on legal defense was off the charts. He cost that county tens of millions of
dollars. That. I've always just thought about the recidivism. I haven't thought about the lawsuits.
Think about that. When we talk about different things, one of the things I have to do if I'm not following statute and I violate people's rights, I sit down with the person suing me, their defense, my defense, the judge, and we hammer this out. And it's not unusual for states to settle $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 lawsuits when they do something wrong. If you do some research, I think you'll be astounded at the cost of the litigation in Maricopa County and at just for legal defense, and then the settlements that they did. And I think often you'll find there'll be unnamed amounts, right? And holding, no further holding any in account. But to feel good about punish costs the taxpayer so much money, and it's so inhumane. It doesn't make any sense other than I'm tough, which means you're stupid.
It's this old kind of like Old Testament. You were wicked and you must be brought to heel. It's why
last
we call
I
them
knew, there's a New Testament, right? There's a New Testament. The old stuff didn't work, and there's a new agreement. Right?
Yeah. I'm with you. Well, we'll wrap up in a second. How about this? Theoretically, let's say you had the ear of every state legislature in the country. It sounds like you already meet with wardens and superintendents regularly, so you already have their ear, presumably. But if all the state legislators and governors are going to meet for a big meeting and they want to hear what you have to say, what would you tell them?
I would say that I would show them the Maine Model of Corrections. I would show them the work that we're doing. I would show them the data, which doesn't lie. What is the return to custody rates? How does that help them fiscally? Because all the legislators and governors are looking at their budgets, especially in 2025. It makes fiscal sense. It makes public safety sense. It is a win. Ask yourself what you're doing now. Is that working? Now's the time to take a different path for your communities and for your budgets.
I think this is great. I applaud what you're doing. I think this is absolutely amazing. I would love for this to proliferate throughout the country. Are there programs or grants to fly out wardens or state legislatures to you so that they could see what you're doing?
We've had 12 states come visit and spend time, and we bring in security people, leadership teams. There isn't yet, but I'm working with some potential foundations that might set that up. I just talked to somebody 2 weeks ago about the ability to bring multidisciplinary teams from systems to come see what we're doing for 3 or 4 days. So the entrenched sort of sergeant can talk to the sergeant here and hear, no, I was entrenched too. This works, right? And the clinicians meet with the clinicians, the wardens meet with the wardens, they get tours, they do workshops, they meet with the residents, and they can see it firsthand. The same thing we've been doing with Norway for decades. But there's an inability to turn American prisons into Norway politically or whatever the barriers are. If you're interested in a normalized sort of environment, come to Maine, come visit. My doors are open. We're very transparent. Whoever wants to come, please come visit. I'd love to be able to share what we're doing.
And I'll add on my end, I don't have particularly deep pockets, but how about this? If there are any state legislators listening or any wardens listening, first person that reaches out to me, I will fly you out. I'll take care of your airfare. I would love for you guys to bring in as many people as you can. So if you're in a state legislature, you listen to the Political Orphanage, or your friend does, they don't even have to listen. Get them in contact with me. First person that reaches out, I will book you an airfare to go to Maine and meet with the commissioner and see the amazing things they're doing.
Awesome.
And Randy, keep up the good work. Thank you. You were clearly a convicted, busy man. Convicted in the sense of being held, having lots of conviction. Busy man. I'm really grateful for the time that you've taken out of your day because I'm sure that you have a lot going on. But you're doing awesome stuff. Please add me to your Rolodex. I don't know what I can do to help, but if you're like, you know what, we have that one podcaster in our back pocket. Like, let me be that guy. And thank you so much.
Great. Wonderful. Very glad to be here.
Taken from the county jail by a set of curious chances, liberated then on bail, on my own recognizances, wafted by a favoring gale, as one sometimes is in trances, to a height that few can scale, save by long and weary dances, surely never had a male, under such like circumstances, so adventurous a tale, which may rank with most romances, taken from the county jail by a set of curious chances. Surely never had a male so adventurous a tale.